I'm Patsy Rublin. I'm representing the Malden chapter of the Missouri Veterans History Project. I'm here interviewing Mike Mowrer of Kennett, Missouri. It's Wednesday, July 19th. We're at the Boot Hill Youth Museum in Malden, Missouri. Also present is Mitch Green, who's operating the camera, and Nancy Green is taking notes. This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Thanks for being with us, Mike.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Can you tell us your full name, your date of birth, and that kind of thing?
I feel like I'm in the Army.
That's right.
John Michael Mowrer, date of birth 5/25/1945 at Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Wow. Okay. What's the highest rank that you?
Was in the Army, and it was Captain 03.
Okay. All right, and you're a Vietnam veteran?
That's correct.
Okay. What did your parents do for a living?
My dad was a vocational ag teacher in northern Missouri, and my mom was a high school employee as a principal secretary most of the time when I was growing up, and they both later worked for the University of Missouri in Columbia.
Okay. And you were born not in Missouri? How did that happen?
Dad was on active duty World War II, 1945, and stationed at Fort Sill, and that's where I hit the ground.
Nice, nice. He was also in the Army?
He was.
Okay. Do you have any siblings?
I have two younger sisters, one who's deceased.
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that.
Okay.
And so you mentioned earlier when we were talking that you are an ROTC graduate. Can you tell us how you decided to go ROTC? At
the time, I graduated from high school in '63, going to the University of Missouri at Columbia, the land-grant university, and ROTC was still mandatory for all males entering the University of Missouri. The class of '63 was the last class that had 2 years of ROTC required. So you either went Army ROTC, Navy ROTC, or Air Force ROTC through your first 2 years, so that was not a choice once you decided you were going there. Okay. And then in '65, when it was the deciding time whether you went on into the advanced ROTC program or not, the headlines on Vietnam were beginning to show, and there was a lottery and draft looking down the road, and so I went ahead and signed up for the advanced program. Okay.
And you chose the Army because?
Dad was Army in World War II, not a career, and I was born at Fort Sill, and green just seemed to fit.
Oh, okay. And so at the University of Missouri, about how many ROTC guys were there?
I think during my freshman and sophomore year, I think it was probably 5,000 to 7,000, because it was all of your freshmen and sophomore males, and we had 6 spring parades in the spring, and the quadrangle in front of Jesse Hall was literally full of male ROTC cadet freshmen and sophomore Mizzou folks.
So you did all your training for ROTC right there on campus?
All the classes were there, and then you have if you go to the advanced, at that time, if you went to the advanced program, you had a summer camp between your sophomore and your junior year, and that was, in my case, at Fort Sill. Okay. And I think it was 6 weeks of summer camp, and then the next 2 years back at campus.
And when did you, or when did the Army decide what your specialty was going to be?
Sometime during my senior year. Mizzou had traditionally been a branch material school. It was a feeder for artillery, but that was phased out, and it was still. I requested field artillery as my first choice, and was commissioned as a field artillery officer.
Okay. So then there was a lot of guys then that went with you.
Several field artillery, just because of the time and the tradition at Mizzou.
Okay. And so when you got out of ROTC, you were what rank?
A brand new second lieutenant, a butter bar.
A butter bar. What's that?
You wear a gold bar, and you really don't know much.
Okay.
You
all right.
just have.
And that was the nickname.
Yeah, that's That was in graduation, Mizzou graduation in May of '67, which was still held. Everybody graduated at the same time in the stadium, and you're commissioned as part of that. And then,
okay. And so you graduate, and then how long until your first station, and where would that
normally
be?
you would go within a few weeks. I had a year's excess leave for graduate school. My right then new bride had another year left, and so I wanted to stay.
Oh, nice.
And so I actually went on active duty in June of '68.
Oh, okay. Did you, what did you go back to school then, and what did you get your degree in?
I went back and graduate work in agricultural economics, and stayed there a year and did not complete the degree. Ended up getting orders, active duty in Vietnam, and never got that. Got that back on my bucket list.
Okay. Do you wish you had?
Not much.
Not sure.
There.
Okay. All right. So you're at Fort Sill, or that's your first duty station, is that right? Okay. And so how long are you there?
You start out there for the officer basic course, and that's get you where you really know a little more than just putting that bar on you. Okay. And then I was surprised and got orders for Ranger School, and so I went from Fort Sill after the officer basic course in November of '68 to Fort Benning for November, December, and January of Ranger School.
And you become a Ranger because I
took a regular Army commission, was a distinguished military graduate, and you could take the regular Army commission, which gave you another 1 year extra of active duty. I'm not sure why I took that, but and you had to go to either Ranger or Airborne school. And at that time, because of the war, there was too many airborne, and so you ended up going to Ranger school.
And so, tell us about Ranger school.
It was, I think it was 63 days, and there are days I don't remember, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. But
is that because you were so tired, or
well, it was
so busy,
it works on you, and it is a great leadership development thing, and you develop some confidences, and there's 250 of you start out in the class, and 100 to 120 finish. And you learn your limits. You learn to see what other people do once they have passed their limits. And I also have to remember that was 50 years and 50 pounds ago too. So, there are the world has. So,
who was I mean, you're in Ranger school. Who's yelling at you all day long?
Well, you're in an administrative, in the camp area, you have a TAC sergeant. Okay. And it was TAC Sergeant Brickner, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
Who could yell with the best of them. And then when you're in the field, there are tactical officers and NCOs, and those are more training oriented. As you make the mistake, they train you not to make it again.
Okay. Tell us about one of the mistakes you might have made and what happened to you.
Getting 20 guys lost in the swamp at night.
That sounds like a good story. Let's hear a little bit more.
At Eglin Air Force Base, during what was then the so-called jungle phase of I was designated and it was a graded exercise, and I was the designated patrol leader to take a group of about 20 off of rubber boats onto Backwater Bay or Pensacola Bay, and then into swamps, and to get to a particular place to do a reconnaissance of a fake enemy position. Right. And we just got lost in the swamp because I couldn't navigate through.
Right, I would imagine it would be hard to.
Effective. And it turned out that was fine because I'd already passed enough graded leadership exercises to get the tab, which became the only thing that was important in the world.
Okay.
So
I can't imagine being lost in a swamp.
Daylight does come.
So how did they find you? Or did you find your way out?
We just found our way out.
Okay.
We,
All right.
I say lost. We basically knew where we were. We just weren't where we were supposed to be.
Oh, okay.
And it was from the Army standpoint, mission was not accomplished.
Oh,
So,
okay. All right.
it's-
Okay, that makes sense. So you get out of Ranger School, and where do you go from there?
go back to Fort Sill and in a field artillery unit, most of the time as a safety officer with a yellow helmet, doing the safety stuff on the ranges. Fort Sill had, I think it was 8 battalions of OCS at that time, and so as the training school, all the new guys had to learn how to shoot the big guns,
Okay.
and so they needed a lot of safety officers.
Okay, so as a safety officer, what are you doing? Are you?
You're making sure that that gun is pointed where the 95 pounds or whatever it is going to land on the range and not downtown Lawton, Oklahoma.
Oh, okay.
Which
Did that ever happen?
there were instances where there were rounds that went off post and toward the Lawton
Oh,
area.
wow, that's kind of scary.
At that time, the artillery pieces, the sighting system was set up where you could be what they called the batter be laid correctly, be pointed correctly, but that happened twice in a circle because you had a 180 degree sighting system, and so straight north and straight south looked just the same on the dial,
Oh,
and so
okay.
you'd have some. I think they've corrected that.
And live rounds the whole time?
Yes, at Fort Sill there were.
Did it affect your hearing at all?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've had mine not much. I think I've got a 10. I think it's 10% in each ear, and the Army thinks one ear was service connected and one wasn't. So I don't know why that is, but
All right,
It
that's
was-
interesting.
yeah.
Okay, so you're serving as a safety officer. How is it that you transition from that to your next post?
by getting orders saying you're going to Vietnam, you just
Oh,
do it.
that's not fun.
And you know, that was my chosen path at that time. And in '68 and '69, if you were new in the service, that's where you expected to go. And
Was your wife with you?
she was at Fort Sill, and she went back and taught. She was teaching her first year of teaching right outside Fort Sill while we were there, and then next year she moved back toward northern Missouri and taught there. Sent me care packages.
When you get ready to go home and tell your wife, was there any advice that anybody gave you when you go home to tell her that you have to leave?
You know, I don't remember.
No,
I don't
remember. How did that conversation go?
She knew. I mean, it was harder for my mother than for my wife, because at that time, wives were kind of woven into the unit,
Right.
and they were around all other Army wives, and you were kind of
So
in
there
a big
was a support
cocoon.
system.
And now, mom back at home, that was different.
Oh, okay.
And the year in Vietnam was much more difficult for my mother and my wife than it was me. You know.
Well,
And
yeah, because you knew what was happening, and they had
right.
no idea.
Right.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So you get your orders. How long does it take to get your orders and then to be in Vietnam?
I think the orders came probably 60 days ahead of time, maybe 90.
Did you?
I took 30 days leave. I was gone, and we took a '67 Volkswagen through Mexico.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
It was safe then. It was fun.
Oh, well, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you going to be deployed with just yourself and then meet your crew there?
Yes. There is no crew in Vietnam. The initial inflow were divisions or units, and the Marines, the first Marines come in, and the films you see of the kind of the fake landings and all that. But by the time in 68, 69, when I'm going, it's individual replacement, and you all end up on a big commercial jet leased, and there are 200 and some of you sardined in there, and you take off at either. I took off at Travis Air Force Base, and then next time, well, you landed in either in Hawaii or Clark in the Philippines, and your last leg into Vietnam, probably into Tan Son Nhut. You land there, and there's a reception station. A bunch of you all file through, and over here on the other side, there are guys to take your seat that are going back. And where you're close enough that you can hear them, you wish they're welcoming you to their.
So you get there and you're not with anyone that you trained with or anything like that?
No. Which may have been a mistake.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I would think that would be really hard.
Yeah. I went right to the 3rd of the 197th Field Artillery Battalion, which was a New Hampshire National Guard unit. They were one of 3 National Guard Field Artillery battalions activated for Vietnam. They were just guardsmen, and they'd been there about a year when I got there, and I was I was infused into that unit because they were going home. They started taking officers and sergeants and enlisted folks to fill those spots.
Okay. So no real orientation or anything. You just
you did get some in-country first 2 or 3 days sort of in-country orientation.
What would that be like?
Telling you some of the stupid things that other folks have done that you shouldn't even think about doing.
Okay.
And telling you, where that there are dangerous places other than just getting shot at. And
what would be one of those stupid things? Just curiosity.
Going downtown on some of the strips that staying away from parts of the local economy.
All right, I get you. Okay, all right. Well, it's all part of it, right?
Right.
So, okay, so you get there. Who's your commanding officer?
The battalion commander, where I first went, which was the 3rd of the 197th, and his name escapes me, but he was the highway department engineer for the state of New Hampshire, and he was the guardsman who was activated. And really a gentleman and great to work for, and a new young lieutenant. And these guys tended to be older because they were guards people and been on the sergeant major of that battalion had been with that battalion in World War II, Korea, and now Vietnam.
Wow.
And he was
wow.
he was grandpa plus.
Oh wow.
Just it was the best bunch of people to be
Right.
with you could possibly think
Right.
of.
So you felt some camaraderie with
Right.
them.
And they were welcoming,
Oh.
and they knew what they were doing.
So can you describe the base a little bit, the artillery battery that you were at? I'm not sure if it's
Okay.
like in the city or outside or.
Structure-wise, there's 3 corps is one of the big core areas in Vietnam, one of the middle part, Saigon, and north and south, to some extent south. I was part of 3 corps, the 23rd Artillery Group, which is a group of artillery battalions, and that group is what's known as the Corps Commander's hip pocket artillery. We weren't with a division. We weren't with the 1st Division or the 25th or the Americal. We were with Corps. And so where this general officer, the Corps Commander, wanted to put these units, that's what he did, and pulled them around. So we moved a lot. The battalion was headquartered at a place called Phu Loy, which is a fairly large base, not far from Saigon and Long Binh. And Long Binh was our big, huge southern base at 30,000 folks and Chinese restaurants and swimming pools and PXs and Phu Loy was in the kind of the next level and there were, I don't know, maybe 82nd Airborne had a brigade there, and then where the work was done was at the fire bases, and the fire bases are a series of bases that are circular in nature, and each would have usually an artillery battery of 6 guns,
Okay.
And then within the range of those 6 guns would be another circle with another 6 guns. So you not only were supporting ground operations, but you were mutually defending each other.
Right,
You could
okay.
provide mutual defense.
Okay.
And so the fire base is where the action was for the artillery.
Okay.
And that was where the infantry came to rest. So your perspective of the war depended an awful lot of whether you were, if you were so-called an 11 Bravo or 11 Bush, which is the MOS of an infantryman,
Okay.
you may be crawling
Okay.
all day and then curled up at night with
Right.
your eyes wide open.
Oh, okay.
And if you get to come back to a fire base and provide nighttime protection for the fire base, that's really luxury for them.
Oh, okay.
It was my everyday drudge,
Okay.
but
So that's where you are. You're on a fire base.
most of the time I was.
Okay. And so, are you in charge of several guns?
I became the battery commander of F Battery of the 16th Artillery, which was attached to the 2nd of the 12th, which was what used to be the 3rd of the 197th. Okay. And this F Battery was a standalone battery that we were just supported. We were at Fire Support Base Thunder 3. There were QL-13 is the main north-south supply route from just north of Saigon all the way north to the Cambodian border where it comes out. Okay. And along that highway, there's Thunder 1, 2, 3, and 4. And Thunder 3 was up and battery commander of the battery there, and then by virtue of that, the base commander. And here I am, I'm a young captain.
Right.
But that's the way the system was. And you had primarily the artillery, some other, maybe some signal unit there that had special. And then your security was provided by, in my case, almost most of the time, U.S. Army troops, sometimes ARVN troops.
Okay.
That came from the infantry.
Okay.
And some of them be there all day, and then we got extra in at night that came in from the field.
Okay. So tell me about a typical day.
Typical day was glad the night was over. And in our instance, you had to have 2 hot meals a day and cold soda and beer at night. And everybody kept happy if you could do that. And we could do what we were supposed to do, and that was being able to shoot and communicate and protect ourselves all the rest of the time. So hot breakfast, and that was always good. And then you started sometime probably cleaning up from the fire missions during the night. Most of the time, all 6 of the guns would have fired sometime, and so you've got all that cleanup to do. And then your resupply will start sometime mid-morning, because this QL-13 is the main supply route, and the convoy went up every day and came back every day. At the start of the time, it wasn't a paved road, and it's always swept by infantry mine sweeping before any traffic on it. And so once it's cleared, we got resupplied by truck there. And that's your food, and that's your ammo, and that's the mail, and that's
Right.
That's all the good stuff. And then afternoon, you tried to get everything ready, and that's when the sleeping was usually done. Sometime, or at least most of us. Your rest time was afternoon, sometime when things would settle down, and then till dark. Well, you get supper in the meantime. But at dark, then you're back. That's when it starts, because that's when you're shooting most of the time, unless you're supporting an active infantry operator, and that's when the danger is. Okay. That's when somebody's most likely to come up and knock on your concertina wire with something you don't want them knocking with.
Right. Okay. Because I was never in the military, I have a lot of questions about the logistics of it and that kind of thing.
Well, and I find we use it, and I haven't been there for a long time, but it was my life for a lot of years, and the terminology becomes second nature, and I don't realize in talking with people, most of whom have never seen or heard of what I'm talking about, you need to use different terms.
I'm surprised at how many specific names of places that you remember. That's remarkable.
Well,
I think I would have tried to forget it all.
No, you don't. It's and artillery. It was. I would have my smartphone. I would have given anything in the world to had anything close to that, because as an artillery commander, your most important thing is to know where you are exactly, so you know where you're shooting exactly.
Right.
And we were relying on a lot of times old French maps.
Right.
And it's
you don't think of it.
the first thing you do is locate to as precise a survey as you possibly can the center of your battery position, and then everything's done from there. And so location and names are something you
Right. Well, okay, so it sounds like you guys are being attacked every night?
No.
No?
No. I
you're
was in, I counted, I think it was either 18 or 19 different locations for a night or more.
Oh, okay.
Never had a ground attack.
Oh, okay.
Never had one. Lots around, lots that we would shoot to.
Right.
But we had standoff attacks. We'd have mortar rounds coming in and rockets going over because they were terrible. Their aim was terrible.
Okay. Thank God.
And every now and then, maybe you think you'd have something at your probing at your perimeter. Most of the time, it was probably a nervous infantryman on this side looking out.
Okay.
But you don't know that. So
Right.
and so every night you had to start out planning that there was the horde just out there, and you had a field of fire, Agent Orange,
Okay.
where we were in the triple canopy jungle areas, and this was on the edge of it or in it. We had a field of fire that was cleared out at least 300 meters. So we had a perimeter fence around us, and then more than a football field out where there was nothing. And that was done by Agent Orange being sprayed on it over the years, and then big dozers coming and pushing it down and burning it. So we had this big circle that was home inside it, and a big area to watch out in front.
Okay.
And,
All right. So, I guess part of the question that I have is, how many guys do you have per artillery? Is it a gun?
Section, yeah, it's a gun. You had a gun section, and these are 155s, the old shiny barreled that you'd see from World War II vintage.
Okay, so they're
big. It's a 5-inch round, basically 97 pounds, a range of 14,600 meters. So, you might Thunder 1 might be Zenith, Thunder 2 Kennett, Thunder 3 Malden. Protecting 25.
Okay. Wow.
The gun section's generally 8 to 10 folks, full battery, around 200 people in a battery of six guns with your ammo section. You had a motor section that kept the trucks running, and then admin, cooks.
Oh, okay.
Because you were a self-contained, able to take care of yourself as long as you had resupply.
So did you have your own kitchen, or did the base have a kitchen?
The base.
Okay.
And that was the artillery mess section that fixed the meals. And
how was the food?
It was great.
Was it?
Yeah,
That's not what I've heard from other.
There were ways to make it great.
Oh, okay.
We were in Fire Support Base Thunder 3 was in an area that produced charcoal. And the provincial area at Shanton had lots of charcoal bunkers that they made the charcoal. There were ways that units ended up accumulating cash, and I don't know exactly how that all happened because most of it was there when I took over. But with cash and a local economy, you could get whatever you want, and you had a mess section, and the main supply out of Saigon docks, you got frozen steaks. You got there. It took extra effort to make sure it got out to the field, and you got it. Right. But when you made that one of your priorities, we had cold beer, cold soda, and a lot of charcoal steaks.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's great.
Had an underground EM club for the infantry that came in at night, fully under 3 bags of sandbags. These guys could go in and have cold drinks safely under cover.
Okay.
You know.
And they have an officers club as well?
No.
No?
Mm-hmm.
No?
No. There weren't enough of us.
Oh, okay.
I mean, really, you're an artillery battery has a battery commander and an executive officer. You got one captain, one lieutenant. And then the infantry folks that were coming in, they had the same thing. They had a captain as a trooper, company commander, and a lieutenant as an XO. And you just kind of hung together and hope you hadn't made too many of the EM mad during that day. It was.
Okay. You mentioned that you got some care packages. How often did you get mail?
My wife, Jean, of now 50 plus years, sent 1 package a week or more. And it was...
And what would she send?
Cookies. She had to learn that jungles and hot weather and moist weather, frosted stuff didn't last well. But she got really good at that, and pistachio nuts, one of the things I remember, and then stuff like that. Okay. Had an uncle in Kansas City who sent a tin of popcorn once a month, and one of the 3 divided tins from some place in Kansas City. And that lasted, the time that hit, it never got to my, it lasted about 5 minutes, but it was, those things were really important.
Right.
And it was just the touch to home that particularly I was fairly young, but you had 17 and 18-year-olds, and they may be 6 months from home. Right. And had never been anyplace else.
So you shared your stuff with your guys?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Did you have any guys with you that didn't ever get a letter or anything?
Not that I know of. I mean, and there one of the more tragic times. I flew into Thunder 3 with the battalion commander and replacing a captain that was being pulled out. There was a young guy, new troop, rode up with me, and the battalion commander. Battalion commander stayed there a while and introduced me to the first sergeant and the chief of firing battery, your 2 NCOs that really knew what was happening, and left. And before lunch, I heard a shot. This guy that had ridden up there had taken an M16, put it on his foot, and fired. Intentionally, that was his way of not facing whatever was going to happen at Thunder 3. Wow. And I've never seen him since then. Wow. But it's always how tragic was it, because we didn't lose anyone. Right. We were very seldom in real danger. But there was something in his mind that that was better for him than to face it.
Wow. Wow. That's so sad.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that. Were you there during the Tet Offensive?
No, I was a year after. I went there in June of '69. Tet was February of '68, January, February of '68. The wrap-up was still kind of winding down, but I was there more at the time that after President Nixon had decided that the Vietnamization program, that was our start of our pullout. Oh. And that was, we were slowly and methodically turning the war over to the Vietnamese armies and others, Air Force and so. Okay. The battery that I commanded in April of '69, we were pulled out of the field, brought back down to the base camp, Phu Loy, for about a week of stand down and getting our stuff all together, polished up, and then I had a big ceremony to turn the battery, meaning the guns and all the equipment, over to a Vietnamese unit, and that was part of that was the Vietnamization. Oh. And the Vietnamese artillery batteries are commanded by majors rather than captains. And so there was some Vietnamese major who had probably been at Fort Sill for artillery training. Right. That I turned, through the big ceremony, flags and all, turned the 6 American guns over to the Vietnamese. Wow. And it was quite I remember being not happy because it's part of, they inspected the guns and they thought they were old. Well, they were old. Right. But they've been.
They were shiny and as new as possible.
They'd been all we had.
Yeah, and they kept you safe.
So that was '69, '70 that was started, and then I'm sitting in law school in April a few years later, and I see the shots of leaving the tower on top of the embassy and the helicopters going over and the. There you start.
Yeah, I remember watching that on TV. Wow, that's scary. I'm glad you were home.
I was too.
You had mentioned something about something that happened on August 26th of 1969.
Yeah, the third of the 197th, I told you, was the New Hampshire National Guard unit. In May of '68, they'd been activated. They spent 2 or 3 months at Fort Bragg training as a unit. Then they left, and they flew over. Their equipment went to Norfolk, I think, and loaded on ships and came around. They met up with their ships and their equipment like in August and September of '68. Gone that whole year. August of '69, they're all going to get on the plane, fly home. They had turned their equipment over to guys like me that were infused in, and it was just, we were double covered with, and they were all leaving. A battery was at Thunder 3. They were the last group to come down, to stand down to go to get on the plane, fly home. The last truck was the mess truck in the convoy coming down Highway 13. It hit a bomb, 5 of them. 5 guys from Manchester, New Hampshire, all of them died. Oh. And they're on panel W19 of the wall.
Wow. To make it that far and not make it home,
I was this young awful. Still. I was an assistant operations officer at that time. Hadn't been in the battery. I was still first lieutenant at that time. Took a radio call, and I went from the Battalion Operations Center to the Battalion S3, Major Von Haslin, and the Battalion Commander, and gave him that message. They could not cry. They just.
Yeah.
I don't think I did, and that's bothered me. My lack of.
Well, I think that was how you were trained.
Yeah.
And
looking back on it, you didn't grieve because a couple of reasons. One, you didn't have time, and secondly, it probably wouldn't have been healthy to do so.
Right.
Now maybe I'm wrong on that second part.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to look back and make changes. So, it says here on your information that that you received the Bronze Star with 2 oak leaves.
That's right.
Can you tell me a little bit about
Those
that?
are all service awards, not valor awards. All for different things. One of them, if you were a battery commander and didn't get one, you really messed up. So one of them was kind of expected. One of them came in connection with a artillery move by 3 different means. We started the day by moving by truck from Thunder 3 to Thunder 2, and then from Thunder 2 to a remote jungle base. From Thunder 2, we flew by C-130s to another base. So we went truck, fixed wing C-130s, and then helicoptered into the jungle base, and that was all done in one day. Oh. And 6 guns got there, and we were ready to shoot before dark. Wow. And the Corps commander, I think, thought that wouldn't happen. And our guys were good enough; they made it happen. Wow. And I'm the one that ended up with the Bronze Star.
How do you get one of your guns out in the middle of the jungle with a helicopter?
With a great big helicopter and a long sling.
Okay.
You've seen the ones that look like kind of like a praying mantis. Uh-huh. They're the big. That's what moved the 155s, okay. And the sling would come down, and then there's a sling apparatus around the 155, and one of your cannoneers stands up on top of that 155 with his and hooks it into the hook. Oh. Static electricity, because of the spark will literally knock you off the top of the. Oh, so you always tried to ground it first. You had the ground rod and the gun, right. And these things just dust everything. Oh, wow. And tents, if you had anything in the way, it was. But that's you moved with the.
Wow.
And then most of the men and equipment moved in with Chinooks, the twin rotor.
Oh, okay.
Stuff. So that was the normal move. Right.
So I'm imagining that you're going to your site to survey it and get your spots ready for the guns to come in, or
the executive officer does that.
Okay.
The XO always went out first, and okay. I was usually there, here, and there.
Okay. Flying back
if you were moving, generally, we didn't have any organic helicopters. I mean, there wasn't artillery, but generally, the battalion would get one, and the battery commander would have transport during the move day.
I would think that they would want you to get moved pretty fast.
You're supposed to, well, I really wasn't that important. I mean, really, I'm serious. I wasn't, whether I was there or not, are there people there that can aim and shoot those guns? Okay. And I wasn't one of the ones that did that. It was the guys in the Fire Direction Center and on the radios, and the guys on the gun crew that had to figure out which way it was pointed. Okay. that were critical. And if those guys were there and there was ammo back here, they were in business. And whether I was in downtown Saigon or not, they didn't care.
Okay. All right. How often did you make moves like that?
That unit moved 54 times in 52 weeks. And part of it was just 3 tubes at a time, or maybe 2, but most of them were full, about half of them were full 6-gun moves.
So once a week and a couple of times twice a week?
Yeah. Wow. And I wasn't battery commander all that time. Okay. But that was part of the issue with my predecessor, was he was beat up.
Okay. And so you're moving those because
that Corps commander or somebody that he listens to says, we don't need those guys there anymore, they need to be over here. Okay. And that may be for whatever.
Okay. Was there a lot of stuff where they would move somebody and then move it right back?
Yeah.
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 Was that frustrating?
You didn't have time to be frustrated.
Okay.
You got where you felt, you know, you've seen MASH, and you know that whatever their code word for the get out.
Right.
You kind of had that. You got that. Well, and it made it. We had absolute hardcore rule. Nobody went to sleep until everybody could sleep under 2 bags of sandbags. And nobody could go to sleep until all the ammo was under 3 bags. And so our nights, you know, but that was because if we did get hit, you know, and one mortar round into a uncovered ammo stack, it ruins your whole
Yeah,
night.
I would imagine it would.
And so they got used to it, and if you, this was at the time that the morale was difficult in some units. And I can clearly understand that, why. But we didn't have that because we worked hard at making each other comfortable and working together. And that.
Right. And by working together, do you think that was because the officers really wanted to do that as a unit, or
The XO and I didn't get to spend much time together because we were each doing different things. And he had the same approach. And the key, more than anything else, was your 2 NCOs are old, experienced guys. And the artillery, they call him Chief of Smoke. He's Chief of Firing Battery. He's head of the 6 guns. And the first sergeant, who's had all, they knew, and I was old enough, I knew they knew.
Okay.
And so I was able to kind of stay out of their way.
Who was your NCO? Do you?
Well, Sergeant Rompanen was the first sergeant, and the Chief of Firing Battery, name escapes me. He was about 6'6". He was from southern Alabama.
Wow.
And if there was a discipline problem, and I didn't know it because it didn't get past him, you know.
Okay. Did you get to do any leave or anything like that?
R&R in December of '69 and on to New Year's of '70. Flew to Honolulu, met my wife, had great on.
Right.
And people were great. They, you know, a lot of that was the R&R spot for married folks, and I remember, and they crossed the international date line. So I think I had 2 New Year's Eves. I think that was, it may have been the other way. It may have been 2 Christmas Eves. But walking through downtown, one of the main streets in Honolulu, right before New Year's, a explosive firework of some sort goes off. I end up on the sidewalk, and am back in that mode, and look around and see Jean standing there, you know, and I'm wondering, well, why is she not here? Well, of course, I'm upset for 2 reasons. One, I didn't think about her, and secondly, you know, she didn't know what I was doing on the ground, and that's been, but it shows that even I was trying to decide whether it was incoming or outgoing. You know, that's what my and so my reflex was to get out of the way until I determined what it was.
Right.
So you get conditioned to your environment.
Does that still happen to you now? The fireworks go off?
I have probably some PTSD. I still want to check a perimeter, and I'll wake up. I don't sleep well. I'll wake up well, and I want to wander the windows.
Okay.
And you know, they've all been safe for lots of years, but it's still kind of that way. The loss of the 5 guys has occupied my mind and time more than it did at that time. And I've become much more active and concerned on veterans' rights and veterans' benefits, and have a passion that we can't forget that. And it's my group, the Vietnam group, whatever didn't happen that should have happened, that's well behind us. That's, we can forget that as a vet. We should forget it as a nation, whatever was right or wrong. But we've got our longest war ever now going. Yeah. I watched the 3rd of the 197th go through a deployment ceremony 2 weeks ago Sunday. These kids look like they're 12 years old. And they're going to Fort Bliss for 2 weeks or 2 months, and then to Guantanamo for 9 months. You know, we still have them working, and we're still losing. You know.
And you did one tour in Vietnam?
Yes, I did.
And these guys are doing how
Some
many?
of them are doing the 5th and 6th deployment.
Yeah, it's just crazy.
We just need to remember that we owe a lot to them.
Yeah. So is that why you are a part of the State of Missouri Veterans Commission?
I think so, because I sent in a thing and said that's my interest. And
Okay. How many commissioners are there?
There total would be 9 when it's a full commission. There are 4 legislators, 2 senators, 2 reps, and then 5 non-legislative that are appointed by the governor.
Okay. Does this give you the opportunity to meet a lot of veterans?
Yeah, it does. It does. You hear a lot of war stories, some of them more than once, you know.
That's not a bad thing.
No.
I'm wondering, did you guys ever have a special visitor on base?
Not on base, as far as there was the Bob Hope show. You know, It wasn't on base, but it was at Zwanlock, I think. Either Zwanlock or Zion. Okay. And that would have been, I guess, I think it was the time I was gone, maybe. But that's troops going. I didn't see it, but it was a big deal. Oh. And it was not unusual to have at Fuloy, at the battalion, there were lots of USO shows, and they were basically pretty good. Okay. And of course, our standards were pretty low too, because you had, and I don't mean this in a derogatory manner at all, but our music of the '60s that, you know, came out of all that good stuff of the '60s, sung with a Filipino accent. It just didn't sound quite the same. You know, it just, and I still, you know,
I would imagine.
Yeah,
that's funny. So no big brass that came by or anything like that?
Anybody that outranked me was big enough. I mean, that was, and we had, I never had major commanders. Now at Fuloy, yes, at the battalion you would, but at the out at the fire base, no. Those, they tended to, and as they should have, the infantry and mech units that were involved in the terrible stuff out front. And if they might come to a fire base that had been in support of an operation. Okay. I don't remember.
What's your most vivid memory of being there?
The carnage of a roadside bomb and a Vietnamese bus going south on Highway 13 after the road had been swept. But
wow.
And our Thunder 3 Barber was on there. We had a
Your Thunder 3?
Barber who he was a Vietnamese, and he'd been vetted and came and did our was our barber.
Oh, that's too bad.
He was killed.
Oh.
It was.
And so I'm guessing the Vietnamese would come over and plant bombs on the
during the night, and just they weren't. We didn't, you know, the Gulf War. We were roadside bomb. I don't remember what we called them. I mean, they were a lot of times they were artillery shells. They were our 155 duds, and they were picked up out of the jungle and then rigged to be detonated either remotely or by a pressure device or something.
Let me look at my notes here. Did you take any pictures while you were over there?
A lot.
Do you have any with you?
Not, well, I have some, but not mainly the ones I took. This one is taken from the air, and that is Thunder 3.
Oh, wow.
From the air, and you can
really see how that Agent Orange just took out everything.
all of your main supply routes in our area anyway, you had, as you drove along, and Thunder 3 became asphalt during the time I was there. And if you get on internet now and look, it makes Highway 25 look second rate. I mean, you know, it's a
yeah, you can definitely see the rings
yeah.
That you were talking about. And is there two, one way in, one way out?
No, there was only one entrance. You had on the back side, you would have generally the fire base would have a dump. We weren't very environmentally attuned, and that dump was exactly what, and that's the stuff that we didn't, including powder canisters, and waste management was in fact a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
And hard. That's a picture of a Chinook picking up like a section, artillery section's equipment that would move with the gun.
Oh, wow. And then down here on the bottom, that's a plane. And
Yeah, that's actually that's a C-123, as opposed to C-130, which is the bigger one that we traditionally flew in when we moved the tubes by fixed wing. Okay. And as this was an experiment to see if a 155 would really fit in the back end of a C-123.
And did it?
It did. It made the loadmaster, who was in charge of protecting his plane, really nervous.
Oh, I would imagine.
But it did in fact fit. And I don't know that we never moved by one. Wow. One thing I hadn't mentioned is how do you buy things? Okay. And in Vietnam anyway, we had MPCs, military payment certificates. These are a couple, and the picture of the guy in the back you may not need, but those are MPC certificates. And that today, this series of MPCs is what you would use to buy things.
And that's 50 cents?
And that one is, yes.
Oh, and it's got an astronaut on the back.
And you've got the whole multiple denominations. And as opposed to using greenbacks, which you really weren't supposed to use, and the local economy was supposed to operate between us and them with MPCs. Okay. To control black market operations and to cut down the fraud opportunities, you had what were called C days. There were conversion days. And that was this series of MPCs is the legal tender today. We have a conversion day, and there is a whole new series. And these all become worthless. And so it's a big deal, because some way, even out to Thunder 3 and out to the infantry unit out in the jungle, somebody has to go out with the new stuff, collect all the old stuff, and exchange it one for one. And any of your local economy folks, the bases are locked. What they had as their operating stash today is worthless tomorrow if they had not gotten it in a lawful manner.
Right.
So
Okay.
it did work on,
Okay.
but it was.
So that's why, instead of greenbacks, that's
That's
why
right.
they did that. Okay.
But still, the currency of choice was greenbacks.
Okay. Still today.
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
other photos do you have there?
Oh. That is Fire Support Base Carolyn, which is in War Zone C. There's a mountain called Nui Ba Den. It's north and west of Saigon. The Cambodian incursion in May of 1970, when President Nixon said we're going to go in, this sets where it can fire into two of the major places where the incursion, where we crossed the Cambodian border. And it had been a special forces camp in the mid-60s. It had been all but overrun, and they'd withdrawn, and a B-52 strike had come over that, an arc light strike. And all the pits that you see there are big swimming holes made by your friendly B-52 flyover some 5 years before. And we had 6 artillery tubes around there, and we had some of the best swimming holes in the country. But it was really.
Do you have a lot of snakes in those swimming holes?
Not that I remember.
Not that you remember?
Not
Okay.
that I remember. And those are some Vietnamese troops that were providing us security, and they're putting in fencing around the Fire Support Base Carolyn. That would have been in the fall of '69. And we were there.
Did you get to know any of the locals at all?
Not closely. Some early on when I was not out in the field, but once you're out there, although you could go into the jungle and there'd be no one, and then there were locals. And they showed up commerce ready with cokes and fresh fruits. And,
Oh, wow.
You'd think there wasn't anyone within 50 miles.
Right. And they would show up. And were you concerned with who they were?
Yes,
or?
yeah. And they did not get to come in, and
Okay.
they had to stay out.
Okay. Did you buy anything from them? And did you ever
I did not, but the troops did, under pretty tight control,
Okay.
watching, and because you had to be careful.
Right. Yeah, I was just curious if anything had gotten in that shouldn't have gotten
There
in.
were those incidents of the young kid on the Lambretta and the hand grenade, and so there were concerns.
Oh, okay. That's scary. Can we see your awards, your ribbons?
Well, you may. This my wife commissioned the shadow box, which I've always been. The one upper right, that's the Bronze Star with the 2 oak leaf clusters. This is the Army Commendation Medal with a V, Device for Valor. This is the National Defense ribbon for just being, and that's the Vietnam Campaign ribbon that doesn't have the campaign stars on it for specific. There's from one date to the next date, there is a name for a campaign in all of our wars, and I haven't done that. And these are unit crests. After I got off active duty, I transitioned to Medical Service Corps and was a medical service training officer with a hospital unit, reserve hospital unit in Columbia. And that's what some of these are. It hangs on the office wall, and every now and then you look around and you can recall some good things and some bad things.
So what was it like coming home?
You got pulled out of the field, and I thought I was done in April when I turned the battery over. I went back to battalion and was in the S3, the operations shop, running radios part of the day. And the night of April the 30th, the battalion commander came to me and he says, "Captain Mowrer, you're going to need to leave tonight." And that's when we'd gotten the word of the Cambodian incursion, where we were sending major units into. And Alpha Battery, of 2nd of the 12th, which is what that unit was then, had a brand new battery commander, and the battalion commander thought he needed someone seasoned to go with him. And I happened to be the most seasoned thing that he had. And so the night of April the 30th was going up Highway 13 at night on a night move, which you didn't do. But you did, and made it to Tinyon, which had the air base for, and the 11th ACR was taken off from there May 1st. And this unit had, Patton's son had been the squadron commander a couple times before. And so they were making, the guy sitting up in the tank, in the turret, and doing that on the way to Cambodia. And I was in a 01 Bird Dog airplane up above them watching. And so that was fine. But I spent the next 6 weeks in Cambodia.
Wow.
And we had very little contact, very little, but I didn't know that, you
Right,
know,
yeah.
going into it.
Yeah.
And so I was, so I got pulled out of Cambodia to come home. Went back to Phu Loy, spent, I think, a day and a half there. And then you go to an out place. You go back to Tan Son Nhut Air Base, and you're there. And you go just 180 move from how I came in 12 months before. I go down the other lane onto an airplane and fly back.
Same kind of commercial airline?
It was. They were, I don't remember the names, they were government contracted, and some of them were main commercials, and some of them were just at that time.
Right.
One of the interesting things was I'm at near the moon landing, and you know, here I am, I'm watching on a small battery powered off of a generator, watching the moon landing, and I'm thinking, you know, we can do that, and we still just out here in the, you know, shooting at each other. It didn't, and we couldn't watch it live, as I remember, because we didn't have transmission. It had to be flown into the Philippines, the tape, and they could broadcast it from the Philippines to the Armed Forces Network facilities in Vietnam. So we didn't get it live, but it wasn't far off, and I was amazed at watching that.
Okay. And so you're sitting with the little TV. Is it just you, or are there others?
No, we were in the Fire Direction Center, which would have been where all the targeting is done, and probably 6 or 8, 10 people, and probably others that were able, because, I mean, it was a big deal for us.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah. Well, that's neat.
We got Stars and Stripes about every day, the paper, and you kept up. Of course, it was, you know, some of it was filtered news, maybe. It may have had a little,
Okay.
but it was all stuff you wanted to hear.
So when you got back, how much longer were you in?
Came back, and I came back through Travis Air Force Base and then across the bay to San Francisco to fly from Frisco to Oklahoma City to go back to Fort Sill. Had a war trophy rifle over my shoulder walking through San Francisco airport, which wasn't even looked at twice. I mean, it was wrapped in a bag. Got on the flight Friday night in San Francisco International. There were some other GIs on, but a handful of us, and the rest of the plane was on the way to Vegas for a weekend junket's what it amounted to. And boy, did we feel out of place. You know, that was a part of, you know, the world we hadn't thought about. Landed in Oklahoma City. The wife picked me up back to Fort Sill, and then I go into the officer's advanced course, which is the career course. I thought I was going to probably stay. Spend 9 months there at Fort Sill in a class, career officer class. It's a gentleman's class. There's not a whole lot of work and a lot of academic stuff and curricular stuff. And about everybody just back from Vietnam. A lot of our wives were just pregnant or just getting pregnant, and so a lot of family activities, 9 months of, and then back to the University of Missouri on the ROTC staff for what ended up being my final 3 years.
Okay. So you were teaching ROTC?
As an assistant professor of military science, you got sent to West Point for a history class, teacher's class. You got spent part of one summer there. Came back and taught National Defense Organization, military history, and then land navigation and tactics. At a time when the university campuses weren't the most friendly place to a uniform.
Oh, yeah,
And my campus, which I left in June of '69, was a lot different when I came back in '71, '72.
So they didn't treat you very well when you came back? On campus?
A few, but the 6,000 that used to have spring parade on the quadrangle, it's now inside a chain link fence, tennis court sized area.
Oh, wow.
Because,
Yeah.
and I had no idea. I'm in Cambodia when Kent State happens. I have no concept of Kent State until I come back. And even at that time, I remember Walter Cronkite and the guys talking about it. But it's years later before, and really when I start teaching, that I get a concept of Kent State and what that meant. And you go out on inspections of other ROTC departments. You go to Wash U, and they've been burned out, and their files that they have are still charred in the new building. And then you get some concept that,
Yeah, that's tragic. Wow.
signed the first lady ROTC cadet at Mizzou, and it was probably '72. And, that's become
Normal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, my army, we were all male.
Can you talk a little bit about that? That's kind of interesting to me. Do you remember who it was, or was there?
It's kind of like remembering the chief of firing battery. It bothers me that I don't. I can see her face and know that she stayed in for at least 2 years. I don't know whether she was commissioned or what, but I do know that was at least the start of what's become a strong
she
tradition.
Was pretty welcomed in?
I think so.
Yeah.
ROTC, of course, was kind of a small club by itself by then, because it certainly was not.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't something anybody really wanted to join anymore. Yeah. Which is unfortunate. That's a time I'm glad that I was so little that I don't really remember it. So.
And that change in the college campus was really a shock.
Yeah, from when you're being supportive to supported, and that you're part of what's really a big, huge part of what's going on, and to lose that, I can't imagine.
But
it is what it is, I guess.
yeah, well, and I look back on the '60s, and not everything we did in the '60s was productive. So I don't know that we want to.
That's funny.
It wasn't all destructive either, but.
So, what's in the box?
That box is a often seen ammo box, except the difference with this is your .155 millimeter artillery shell is not fused. It's shipped without a fuse on it. And the last thing you do before you put it in the breech and fire it is screw a fuse on. And you got a fuse wrench that puts on. This is the box that held the fuses for your .155 high explosive, about 96-pound round of steel and explosive that we had all over. It has, I'm not sure how I got back with it, but I did, and it was packed in December of 1968, so there's some chance that I actually had it. And it's held shoe polish and shoe brushes since then.
What's it say on the top?
So.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting. So that's not something you were supposed to bring back with you?
I
No?
I don't really know. I mean, there wasn't any organized, make sure we get our ammo box back.
Right.
You know, it more likely than not would ended up at the dump.
Oh, okay.
And
How did you come about the rifle that you were talking about?
it's a CKC, which is a Czechoslovakian-made Russian block, Soviet block 7.62 rifle, and it was in a cache of weapons that were found in Snool in May of '70, and that was the Kosman, the overall, the main command headquarters that we were going to find and catch and get. They eluded us for all those years, and it was in fact their headquarters. And the incursion was that part there was to get them, and they had been there, but they had gone by the time we got there.
This was when you went to Cambodia.
Right.
Okay.
And the unit presented that to me as a war trophy, complete with a paper that made it legal,
Wow.
lawful, and I've kept it.
Wow. That's neat. Did you come back with anything else?
Not really. I wasn't thinking about those things. One thing I didn't bring back that most did was a poncho liner, which is the greatest little blanket thing in the world, and you grew well. That's what you wanted when you were sleeping. I didn't get back with one for some reason.
Okay. Do you still have your uniform?
I still have some of them because I stayed on active duty on the active reserves through the early '80s, and so I still have some. Have a nice dress blue uniform that didn't get much use. Looked like a bandmaster, but
That's fine. I guess that's one question I have. Is there a memory that you have that you look back and it just makes you laugh like crazy?
yeah, the general memory is of our officer advanced class bowling league during that advanced course, and particularly toward the end of that 9-month course, and it was a couples league, and most of the couples had the lady that looked like she was carrying 2 bowling balls when she got up to the line because there was something in the water, and we had more fun in that league. We were all glad to be back. We were all happy. We weren't, and we were all within that army, that big army cocoon that protected us from any of the pressures of the world. And so, and you had, most of us were just starting families, and we'd been to Vietnam. We got combat pay. Most of us had money that we may not have ever had cash that you could, and so it was. You could actually go and buy a refrigerator.
Oh, wow. So did you have any kids when you were in Vietnam,
No.
so just when you got back?
Yeah.
And son or daughter, and when
son
were
was
you
born. Son William was born in July of ~71.
Okay. They're on base?
No, at Columbia.
Okay.
Boone County Hospital.
Oh, okay.
$25 under Champus. And then my daughter Jane, 3 years later, again in Columbia when I was in law school.
Yeah, it cost my mom and dad $5 in Germany when they had me on base. So.
That's before we had a healthcare problem.
Do you have anything else that you want to show us?
Not necessarily. There are some.
Oh, don't worry about that. I'll be fine down there.
One thing that the Army was really good at giving you licenses and everything for. One thing, I found my draft card.
Oh, wow.
And that's at Putnam County, Missouri, Unionville, Missouri being the county seat. That's where I registered, and that's where my draft card.
What was your draft number?
These didn't have numbers. I mean, I've got a selective service number, but as a The lottery number, no. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
my selective service number was 23904529. That, I don't remember the backside necessarily. Oh, it gave the draft board, it was my home draft board, and I don't think I lied about my weight then. That was probably true. And then this was my Army ID. You know, it's not.
Wow, you were just a baby.
Yeah, had hair. When I was on assigned to ROTC faculty, Fort Leonard Wood was supported us, and before I could operate the equipment there I had to go to Fort Leonard Wood for training, and I think I got a day. It seemed like it was a day's worth of training. In 21 February 1973, I am qualified as an official U.S. Army projectionist and was graduated at the U.S. Army Audio Visual Support Center, and I am qualified to operate, and there are a whole bunch of things on here, but a 3M overhead projector and a Kodak 35 millimeter camera. And
Maybe one of the most dangerous pieces of equipment you ever used.
That's it. So those are things that I've got. And then I actually had a driver's license for a sedan, a truck 4x2, and a truck quarter-ton 4x4, which is a Jeep, and then a couple others. So
Nice. What's the poster?
that's it's a Tet of 68 map that came from, I think, Kansas City Star, maybe. Yeah, Kansas City Star, that was run after the Tet Offensive of 68. And General Larry Kay, who's the executive director of the Veterans Commission, got that someplace and sent it to me, and I.
So where in Cambodia were you?
This area here is the Parrot's Beak, which you can see kind of, and up here, this is not as clear, but that's the Angel's Wing, which is the international boundary configuration, and we actually went in right to the west of the tip of the Angel's Wing. This Thunder 3 is right there. Thin Yan, that base that we flew out of and the tanks came out of, was right there. This is all 3 Corps, and you hear I Corps and I have no concept of the Marines world up north, or the world down in the Mekong Delta. So,
It's an interesting map.
yeah.
Huh. Oh, interesting. Any other good stuff over there?
The Varmints Knife, out of a Varmints set. This was, I think, with me, because it's a Camillus, C-A-M-I-L-L-U-S, 1966, and it's was part that we called them linemen that carried the commo pliers, and they strung all the commo wire, and
Oh,
these were
okay.
part of their set. It had screwdrivers and punch and knives and church key.
Wow, and yeah.
Cannon. So,
One other person that calls it a church key. That's awesome.
Yeah. you got you got to have.
It's still in really good shape.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
surprised.
not very sharp, but it's. And it had U.S. on it, just in case anybody questioned the origin. The rest of it's just stuff.
Any other stories you want to tell us?
No, I think I'd say that you don't understand what you are doing when you are there, and it's only through time and change and maturity that you look back, and then you clearly understand why you understand the depth of the tragedy of war, and you understand why it is the young that get to go, or have to go, or decide to go, or all of the above. And it makes you wonder why we aren't better as we get to the place in life that I am to have made that less likely than it is today.
Right. That's a good way to finish this, I think. Thank you so much for your service.
Well,
we really appreciate it.
I appreciate the thanks, and it was fulfilling for me, and so
well, I very much appreciate your service, and thank you so much for telling us a little bit about it. I really enjoyed listening. It's always fascinating to me to listen to these stories, and I know sometimes my questions can be a little.
No, they're fine.
So.
The thing that's really is important to me is that my story is not even close to the story of 10 guys that I can name right now that are my age, there at my time, and they were in the combat, and face to face, day after day. Their story and my story don't even belong in the same book. Guys that just came home and did things like Toby Jordan.
Right. I know that you had mentioned that you knew some guys that are on the wall. Have you been there?
Went there in April of 3 years ago, and had seen the traveling wall when it came to Kennett, and looked at it with young granddaughters, which was, and then going to D.C., and we were there in April, Blossom time, and I had 5 names and found them, and it was a tough, emotional time.
Yeah,
but also some closing of a part.
Right.
And I'd never seen any of the memorials, and the Korean memorials. It's really striking.
Is it?
Yeah.
At the Korean memorial, that's with the soldiers that are,
Slightly more than life-size, patrol moving through the night, and wow.
I actually saw that at night,
Yeah.
it was, it just was very powerful.
You could almost feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the wall, I think, is one of the most powerful places I've ever been.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a remarkable place, and I wish that the vets had been honored before, long before.
It sure, there's lots to that memorial. So.
Do you meet with any of your guys that served under you?
No.
No.
You never develop that you talk about battle buddies and all that. Well, first officers, like when you're in isolated small units, there were only 2 of us, and we were both busy. We didn't we were working.
Right.
And then the replacement system, where everybody got their ticket punched and went home.
Right.
Guys that were career officers, like I was on, because I thought they'd send me to law school, and
Right.
You went to Vietnam to get your ticket punched, and you had to have a command card, one where you had combat command, and that set you to go get on the promotion list to major out of the 5%, the top 5%, so you'd advance quickly, and I was just barely getting good at being a battery commander when my time was up.
Oh.
And I think that was a terrible decision. I was glad at the time I didn't have to spend more than a year. But I would have been so much better
Right.
if I had gone in knowing 2 years or,
Right. Did you train your replacement or spend any time with them? No?
well, sometime. I think in my case, the guy I replaced, he got on the ship that I came in on the helicopter. The guy that replaced me was that Vietnamese major, and
that's
so
right.
I didn't have. Now,
Even
I
if you
did,
wanted to have a conversation
I did
with
spend time with that Alpha 2nd of the 12th in Cambodia. That was more what I was doing than anything else. It was still his, but I was kind of.
Did you ever have to write a letter home to anybody?
No. No.
Thank God for that.
No. Those 5 guys, of course, weren't mine. And the guy that shot himself in the foot, he just had a guy killed that ended up dying as a result of wounds on the fire base, but it was he was inflating a deuce and a half tire and
Wow.
tire rim and air-evac'd out, medevac'd out, but he didn't make it. So. And that, he was a 1st Division fellow.
Well, I'm glad that you didn't lose any of your guys. I know you lost.
Yeah,
But-
and you'll never know. You know, you don't know.
What
But
if you left,
but the way we set it up, we planned every night to get attacked, and we had random mad minutes, which were at a designated time. Every weapon on the perimeter fired. Not necessarily every night, but most every night, and that was what was called a mad minute, and you know.
And that was just to try and keep people from.
Well, if there was something there, you were shooting it.
Okay.
If not, more importantly, you were sending a message that we're awake,
Right.
and we're going to be awake tomorrow night,
Gotcha.
and we don't want you to know when it's going to happen tomorrow night. You know, it was just, and it gave those guys that weren't shooting the guns, it gave everybody else something to do.
Right.
And I liked everybody active at night, and then from, like I said, 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock, they could all just be.
Right. That would be the downtime
Yeah,
time that they got. It doesn't sound like you ever got much in the way of downtime then.
No,
No time to relax or.
I wasn't even
I would
thinking
imagine
about
that's why you're still diligent.
Yeah.
You know, while you're still.
Yeah. You know, I don't remember thinking about it.
Yeah.
And one thing, Ranger School conditioned you to not sleep. You know, or guys stopping at trees making phone calls. You know. Well, I've enjoyed the opportunity.
Oh, we've enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much.